Hello, parents and students. My name is Dr. Chad Sayre. I am the principal of Platte County High School, welcoming you to today's podcast where we are talking about secondary grading in preparation for the parent-teacher conferences coming up, but also grade cards coming out. I wanted to make sure that we had a conversation to kind of explain one of the changes that we had here. Before we get to the change, I want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of how we got here. Last year, one of the big district task force committees was looking at secondary grading practices. And one of the goals, or the goal of the group, was to develop a grading system to provide more consistent, accurate feedback and measures of what a child knows, aligned to our principles of learning. So the new grade should really be a reflection of what a student knows, and this is all encapsulated in our principles of learning. If you're not familiar with the principles of learning, they are certainly in every classroom, hanging in the buildings. It's on the district website, but it's also on each individual school's website. Also, we have a secondary grading brochure that has them as well. The big change that we've made this year is the 95-5 assessment and grade reporting practice. Essentially what that means is that 95% of a student's grade is going to be determined by authentic assessments, and 5% is going to be determined or influenced by grading or practice, if you will. Again, the purpose of this change is to make sure that our grades reflect an accurate measure and provide meaningful feedback relative to your student's progress here at Platte County High School. Practice is really determined in being anything outside a classroom. Typically, it's also, if you want to call it homework. Certainly, that is any work that's helped and that's completed by a person outside of the classroom with the help of an adult. The task force was really kind of charged with looking at our secondary grading practices aligned with the principles of learning, and one thing also that we looked at was best practices. What does the research say about some of these things? One of the pieces of research that we found very useful in our conversation was a repair kit for grading by Ken O'Connor. This was published in 2011, and Ken O'Connor really challenges us with two questions on grading. First of all, he says, how do grades provide accurate, meaningful, consistent feedback while supporting individual learning? The second part of that question is, how confident and accurate are grades to reflect students' mastery of curriculum and learning outcomes? Essentially what he's challenging us to do is making sure that grades are meaningful and provide consistent feedback with the support of individual learning. And the second thing is how confident are we that grades truly reflect a student's mastery of the learning outcomes in a classroom? And as we challenged ourselves with those two questions and aligned ourselves to the principles of learning, there were some shifts that needed to be had. These shifts didn't come out of any, they came out of best practices and research, and they really focused on four identifying terms. First of all is accuracy. We want to make sure our grades are accurate. And what I mean by accurate is that academic and non-academic are two separate things that oftentimes in the past they would overlap and determine what the overall grade would be. For example, a student might have a lot of extra credit, might not know the information very well, and they're limited understanding of the objective, but yet as they did the extra credit and turned in things on time and was given bonus points, that elevated that grade beyond what that student really knew as far as relation to the objective. But also the reverse is true, where a student might have a very clear and highly sophisticated understanding of the learning objective, but their non-academic behaviors are getting in the way of their actual true reflection of their knowledge. They're not turning in the homework. They might know it very well, but they're just not turning in the homework. What that means is that the grade will be elevated downward. That really truly doesn't reflect what that student knows. So one of the most important things is that we wanted to make sure our grade was accurate, and 95-5 allows us to do that. We also wanted to make sure the grades were meaningful. Meaningful being the fact that it's aligned and based on objectives that they're learning in the class. On the 95-5, The assessments are aligned to specific objectives and goals of the classroom. If a student is not meeting those goals, it's easy to trace back, okay, here's the assessment that you didn't do so hot on. Let's tease that out, and what parts of that did you not understand? We can clearly identify that, and then we can go back and target some interventions to help them gain that knowledge back. Tours before, we kind of just averaged all the grades together, and it was very difficult to tease out what exactly was causing the student's grade to drop or to excel. And this way we can basically tie goals and learning objectives to grades. You need to make sure that's tight. The third thing is consistency. We wanted to make sure that our grades were consistent from classroom to classroom, where no matter what teacher you got, the 95.5 allows that consistency across subjects and across departments. It also provides some consistency across buildings. This is also being implemented in our middle schools and at the high school. So students, as they progress through the system and through this new grading practice, they will become acclimated and understand that, it doesn't depend on what teacher you get. It's going to be the same assessments in each class. The last thing that we talk about is the grades should support learning. We want to make sure a culture is created amongst our students that is not about doing work or accumulating points. It's truly about the depth and quality of learning. The 95.5 allows us to do that, where if your assessments dictate 95% of your grades, you're going to need to make sure you demonstrate and make sure that you understand, and we are going to know at what level do you know that. Once that benchmark has been established, we can then go back and say, you know what, our retake process allows you to retake that information. So if your question is, if my student's a poor test taker, is this going to negatively impact them? My answer is no, it's not, because what we've done is we've built retake practices where if they do poor on an assessment, they can go back with the teacher's guidance, develop some steps that they need to do to make sure that they understand that content and that objective, and then go back and retake the assessment to demonstrate that you've shown us that you know that information. Again, our grades should reflect a student's learning. We believe the practice of 95.5 is going to allow us to do that. And I wanted to make sure you had that information provided to you today. We're also sending it out in a parent newsletter this week. But if you have any more information, talk to your student. They should be able to speak to some of this at the classroom level. And then you feel free to call the teacher. If you have questions or you need a little more information, the teacher will be able to provide to you some of the information specific to their class. Lastly, if you have a need for greater information, certainly feel free to contact administration at any of the secondary schools, middle schools and high school. We will certainly answer any questions that you have. Thank you again for taking the time to watch this podcast with me. I wanted to make sure that you had a good understanding of what secondary grading practices are here at Platte County R3, and especially Platte County High School, where we are always proud to be a pirate. Have a great day.